It was 2:40 in the morning when the snowstorm outside finally swallowed the last bit of highway noise, leaving me alone in the rural gas station with nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint rattle of the heater trying to stay alive. I had only been working there for 3 nights, and even though I told myself I needed the job, there was something about overnight shifts that never felt right. The silence was too big, too empty, like the building itself was holding its breath and waiting for something I didn't understand. That night was colder than anything I'd felt before. The wind kept rattling the windows hard enough to make the glass vibrate, and the snow kept piling against the door like it was trying to bury the place completely. Inside, everything was still, but pump number 4's camera feed kept glitching every few seconds, the monitor flickering with static flashes, distorting the image like something kept passing in front of the lens even though the pump stood empty. At first, I thought it was the storm knocking the signal out, but then I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps coming from somewhere behind the aisles. Not the shuffle of an animal or the settling of shelves, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone walking. I checked the reflection in the freezer doors, pretending I wasn't scared, trying to convince myself it was just the wind vibrating the shelves, but every few minutes the footsteps returned, pausing whenever I turned my head like whoever, or whatever, was making them didn't want to be seen. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that the isolation was just messing with me, but there was a heaviness in the air. A tension that made the hair on my arms stand straight up, like the store wasn't empty, like the storm had pushed something inside with me. The bell above the door chimed suddenly, cutting through the silence, and a man stepped inside, tracking melted snow and water across the floor. He looked wrong the moment I saw him, not in a violent or threatening way, but in a way that made something deep inside me recoil. His clothes were soaked all the way through, an old heavy winter coat, boots drenched in thick slush, and gloves stiff with ice. Water dripped steadily from his sleeves, forming small cold puddles on the linoleum. He didn't say a word, didn't acknowledge me at all. He just walked slowly toward the counter and stopped a few feet away, staring at the small screen showing the CCTV feeds. His breathing was slow and uneven, almost like he had been running in the cold, and the steam rising from his clothes made it look like his entire body was radiating frost. He raised one hand, trembling slightly, and pointed toward pump number 4's feed, which was glitching again. His voice was quiet, hoarse, and strangely distant when he finally spoke. "Is the pump still showing me?" he asked, as though he had been waiting for someone to confirm something he already feared. I forced a small laugh, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nobody's out there right now," I told him. "Storm's got everyone staying home." He didn't look at me. He didn't nod. He just stared at the screen like he was searching for something he desperately needed to see. The monitor flickered again, static distorting the image, and for half a second, I swear I saw a figure standing beside pump number 4. But when the static cleared, the pump was empty again. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the light, but the man's breathing changed. He inhaled sharply, as if he had seen something I wasn't supposed to. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked out into the storm, the door chime echoing through the empty store as he disappeared into the white curtain of snow. I watched him leave, confused and unsettled, trying to understand what had just happened. After a minute passed, curiosity got the better of me, and I reached over to rewind the CCTV footage. It was stupid, I know, but I needed to know if he had been out there before he walked in. I scrubbed through the recording until I found the moment he arrived, but something was wrong. The footage didn't show him walking toward the door. Instead, it showed him standing at pump number 4, just standing there in the freezing storm, completely motionless facing the camera. His body looked stiff, unnatural, like he hadn't moved in hours. Confused, I paused the footage and squinted at the corner of the screen where the timestamp usually showed the date and time. Instead of the current year, the timestamp read February 14, 1989, 2:40 a.m. The same exact date and time as right now, but 36 years earlier. I stared at it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I scrubbed backward, then forward, thinking maybe the system glitched, but the timestamp stayed the same, frozen in the past. Suddenly, the store door chimed again. I jerked my head up, expecting to see someone walk in, but the door was shut tightly, snow pressed against it from the outside. The heater rattled once and then became quiet, leaving the store unnervingly still. That's when I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the store, the aisles closest to the dark storage room. This time they didn't stop when I turned around. They kept moving steady, patient, like someone was walking directly toward me. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice cracking slightly, but the footsteps didn't respond. They just shifted behind the snack aisle. The air grew colder, cold enough that I could see my own breath in front of me, and when I exhaled again, I saw a faint cloud drifting from behind the shelves, as though someone else was breathing there too. I backed up slowly toward the counter, searching for something, anything that could protect me if I needed it. The lights flickered twice, and when they stabilized, the CCTV monitor showed something that made my stomach drop. On pump number 4's camera feed, the man was standing there again, the same way he had been in the 1989 footage, motionless, facing the store, shoulders hunched slightly as though frost were weighing him down. Except now the timestamp had returned to normal, showing the correct date and time. He shouldn't have been there. He had walked away. He had already left. Yet there he was on the screen, the snow swirling around him in a way that didn't match the storm outside, like the wind near him was moving differently. I stared at the monitor, unable to look away, when suddenly the figure tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, until it was angled just enough that it seemed to be looking directly into the camera. A sharp ringing filled my ears, high-pitched and disorienting, and before I realized it, I had backed myself into the cigarette rack behind the counter. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, every monitor showed the same image. The man standing inches from the camera, his face pale, lips blue, eyes lifeless. And then all the screens returned to normal, except pump number 4, which showed nothing at all, just empty snow and swirling wind. The footsteps behind the aisles stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of something dripping onto the floor, slow and rhythmic. I felt the cold again, wrapping around my neck like invisible fingers, and before I could gather the courage to step forward, the store door chime rang one more time. This time it was quieter, like the sound had been weakened or muffled by snow. I stared at the entrance, but the door hadn't moved, hadn't opened. The pressure in the room changed. It felt like someone had just walked out even though I hadn't seen anyone leave. Slowly, cautiously, I walked around the counter and headed toward the aisles, forcing myself to check if anyone was actually there. My heartbeat was so loud it drowned out the wind outside. I turned the corner expecting to see a person hiding, or worse, waiting, but the aisle was completely empty. The floor, however, had a trail of wet footprints leading from the aisle toward the exit. They weren't mine. They were large, boot-shaped, soaked with melted snow. They stopped right at the door, but they never went outside. The last footprint ended inches before the threshold, as though the person had evaporated right there. By the time my shift ended at sunrise, I was shaking so badly I could barely lock the door. When the manager arrived, I told him everything. He didn't laugh, didn't call me crazy. His face just went pale, and he let out a long, tired sigh like he had been hoping this day would never come. Then he told me the story. In 1989, during a massive snowstorm, a man had been stranded at pump number 4 when his truck broke down. He had tried to walk to the station for help but never made it inside. By the time anyone found him the next morning, he had frozen to death less than 30 feet from the door. The camera that recorded his last moments had malfunctioned, capturing distorted footage of him pacing, collapsing, standing again, pacing again, like the cold was controlling him in his final hours. The footage had been sealed by the company after the man's family begged them to remove it. But sometimes, on the coldest nights during the worst storms, the system glitched and replayed fragments of that night on the monitors. And sometimes, the manager said, people swore they saw the man walk inside, dripping with ice, looking for confirmation that he still existed on that pump, still trapped in the final loop of his last minutes alive. I quit after 2 more shifts. I told myself I needed the money, told myself I imagined everything, but the truth is simpler than that. I left because every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing beside pump number 4, snow swirling around him, his head tilted, waiting for me to answer the question he had asked in that cold, broken voice. And even now, years later, I still hear that question sometimes, soft, distant, carried on the wind like a whisper from a night that never ended. Is the pump still showing me? It was my second week working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at the city hospital, a routine I thought I had grown accustomed to, but there was always something unnerving about room 308, a room that had been kept closed for years after a patient had died there just a week prior, and the whispers among the night staff spoke of strange things, Lights flickering for no reason, shadows that moved when no one was in the room, faint sounds that echoed in the hallway long after the machines had gone silent. And I could feel the unease settle in my stomach as I wheeled the supply cart down the corridor that night, fluorescent lights buzzing above, casting harsh white light on the sterile linoleum floors, each creak of a door or rattle of a loose vent sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness, the hum of the HVAC system creating a constant, low vibration that seemed almost alive, and I hesitated at the doorway to room 308, the handle cold under my gloved hand, my breath catching as I pushed the door open, and immediately I noticed the patient's wide eyes, darting nervously toward the corners of the ceiling where nothing should have been, and the moment I introduced myself, the call button began ringing frantically, shrill and insistent, and when I answered, the patient's voice shook with fear, almost pleading, and he said, "Please stop sending that man into my room." And my own heartbeat accelerated, a lump forming in my throat as I struggled to maintain a calm tone, asking, "What? Man?" And the words sounded hollow even to me as the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on my shoulders, while the patient insisted that a tall, dark figure appeared beside his bed every hour, its presence so oppressive that he could feel his chest tighten, making breathing difficult. And though I checked the room carefully from end to end, saw that the monitors and equipment were functioning normally, and verified that no one else was there, there was an undeniable weight in the air, a suffocating tension that made the hairs on my arms rise, a creeping chill that seemed to radiate from the corners, and every time the patient's eyes flicked to the ceiling or toward the darkened corners, I felt a shiver run down my spine, a primal awareness that something unseen was observing, and despite my attempts to comfort him, holding his trembling hand and reassuring him that he was safe, the call button rang again, urgent, demanding, cutting through the silence of the night with a piercing shrillness that made my ears ring, and I could feel the tension mounting, a heavy presence that seemed to press against my own chest, making it hard to breathe, making the air thick and unmovable, while my mind raced with questions I had no answer to, imagining the figure he described, seeing its shadowed form standing just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting patiently, utterly still, while I wished desperately that I could reach out and prove to both him and myself that no one was there. And then, precisely at 4:17 a.m., the room erupted into chaos. The patient screamed, a scream that cut through the hospital like shattering glass, high-pitched and primal, echoing down the deserted hallways, and I felt my stomach lurch as I rushed to his side, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I tried to hold him, to keep him conscious, to keep myself from losing control as adrenaline coursed through my veins, and the room seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the machines beeping and whirring in response to his sudden collapse, lights flickering above, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls, as if something unseen was elongating them, reaching into the corners, pressing in closer, tightening, making every movement seem deliberate, calculated, malevolent, and the security guards arrived almost instantly, insisting that no one had entered the room, that every access point had been locked and monitored. Yet the sense of being watched did not leave, the sensation of unseen eyes boring into the back of my skull, the hairs on my arms standing on end as I glanced toward the corners, toward the shadows that had remained motionless for the past tense minutes. And then one of the guards rewound the hallway footage, his eyes widening in horror as he pointed silently to the screen, showing a tall, shadowed figure standing just outside room 308, utterly motionless, looming in the corridor for 10 minutes leading up to the patient's cardiac episode, and my stomach sank as the figure appeared to shift toward the door in the footage, disappearing in a manner that defied logic, merging with the wall itself, the timestamp making it painfully clear that it had been present before the incident, that it had been there when the patient's heart almost stopped, that some impossible presence had been watching and waiting, and as machines beeped and monitors flickered, sweat pouring down my back despite the antiseptic cold of the air, I felt my knees weaken and my own breathing became shallow, the oppressive tension in the room making it difficult to distinguish reality from imagination, the patient regaining consciousness after minutes that felt like hours, pale, trembling, muttering that he could feel the man standing silently, watching him until he thought he might die, and I helped transfer him to another floor, far from 308, but even after the move, the stories of that hallway persisted, the whispers among the night staff, describing shadowed corners and figures vanishing into walls, strange noises that made one question sanity, and every time I pass that section of the hospital in daylight or evening, I feel the same prickling fear, the sensation of a presence just outside my vision, patient, silent, observing, waiting and utterly still, refusing to leave no matter how much one wishes it would. And in the quiet moments alone, long after my shifts ended, I replay the events in my mind. The call button shrill, the patient's terrified eyes, the shadow looming outside the doorway, and the oppressive weight that seemed to linger in the corners, the air thick with memory and something unexplainable, as if the walls themselves remembered and held that night frozen inside them. And though room 308 remains sealed, empty, and silent now, the very air around it vibrates with the memory of the unseen presence, the tension of a watching figure that defies reason and refuses to leave. And months later, I still catch myself checking corners of every room I enter, feeling the cold weight pressing on my chest, remembering the patient's words trembling in my own voice. Please stop sending that man into my room. And realizing that in that hospital, in that room, some things are never gone, some presences never leave, some shadows linger long after death, waiting for someone to notice, waiting to be seen, to be acknowledged, patient, silent, and utterly still. And the truth is, no one can ever truly stop it, and the fear that clung to that hallway, that room, and that moment lives on inside me, haunting my memory, coloring my dreams, and reminding me with every quiet night that some things are beyond explanation, beyond control, and beyond the world of the living. It was my first month on the graveyard shift at the massive 24/7 shipping warehouse, and I had quickly learned that the night hours brought a tension unlike anything during the day. The facility was enormous, echoing, and desolate, with only 3 workers on that shift including me, and the constant hum of machines, the rhythmic thumping of conveyor belts, and the distant clanking of crates created a strange symphony that made every small noise feel amplified, as if the building itself were listening and waiting. That night I was operating the forklift near the east end of the warehouse, scanning inventory while the others checked packing schedules, when I noticed movement on the upper catwalk, a long metal walkway that ran across the length of the building several stories above the floor. At first, I thought it was one of the supervisors or maintenance staff doing a late check, but there was something off. The figure moved with a precision and fluidity that seemed almost unnatural, stepping lightly across the grated flooring, pausing occasionally to glance downward at the stacks of crates and pallets, and for a moment, I swore it turned its head directly toward me, though I couldn't be sure if it was just the shadow or my imagination. My stomach tightened and I tried to brush it off, telling myself I must be tired, that the building played tricks on the eyes at night, that it was just a security guard taking a round. But the uneasy feeling in my gut refused to leave, a cold knot forming at the base of my spine. Over the next several hours, I caught glimpses of the figure multiple times, always on the catwalk, always moving from one end to the other without ever using the stairs, vanishing and appearing instantly on the opposite side, like it defied the physical constraints of the space. I asked my fellow workers if anyone had seen someone on the catwalk, but they shook their heads, their faces pale, muttering that no one was assigned up there during the graveyard shift, that the upper walkway was technically off-limits unless special clearance was given, which no one had, not tonight, not ever. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that the shadows of crates and the flickering warehouse lights played tricks on my vision, but I couldn't deny the feeling of being watched, the prickling at the back of my neck that made every hair on my body stand up, and the sound of footsteps that echoed slightly differently from the machines, softer, deliberate, moving above me, always in rhythm with nothing I could see, but enough to send a chill crawling down my arms. Around 3:15 in the morning, I radioed the supervisor to report the sightings, my voice shaking more than I cared to admit. "There's someone on the catwalk," I said, trying to sound authoritative despite my fear. There was a pause on the other end, and then his calm but tense voice replied, "No one is assigned up there. Check your lights and your lenses, maybe it's a reflection or a shadow." I nodded to myself, though he couldn't see me, telling myself he was probably right, that it was a trick of the flickering fluorescent lights, that my mind was tired and overworked, but I couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was tracking me. I continued my shift, lifting pallets and stacking crates, but I kept glancing upward, catching movement just at the edge of my vision, a dark silhouette appearing on the catwalk and vanishing instantly, only to reappear on the other end as if it had teleported. Each time I saw it, the air seemed to get heavier, colder, and my palms sweated despite the chill of the night. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize the occurrences, focusing on the task at hand, but the warehouse seemed to stretch on endlessly, every echo and clank amplified in the vast space, creating the sensation that I wasn't alone, that someone had been here watching me since I arrived. Then around 4 a.m. the radio on my forklift crackled suddenly, and a voice whispered, barely audible over the static, "Can you see me now?" The tone was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried an unmistakable weight of intent, a deliberate presence behind the words that made my blood run cold. I froze, the forklift controls stiff in my hands, and looked up at the catwalk just in time to see the shadowy figure step directly above me, its form indistinct in the dim lighting, yet impossibly real. The lights on my forklift flickered, the bulbs dimming and then returning, casting distorted shadows across the stacks of pallets, and I felt a cold gust of air sweep down from the catwalk as if it had breathed directly onto me. Something fell from above, clattering against the metal surface of the forklift and bouncing to the floor, and I instinctively ducked, heart hammering in my chest. I reached down and picked it up, a warehouse ID badge, old and weathered, the plastic chipped, the ink faded, yet perfectly legible. My hands trembled as I read the name on it, and my stomach sank. It belonged to a worker who had died years earlier after falling from that same catwalk. He had been a young man, inexperienced with heights, and the story was notorious among the day staff, though it was usually whispered with nervous laughter, a way to cope with the fact that accidents like that could happen in such a huge facility. But holding the badge, seeing the name clearly, feeling the presence above me, the rationalizations evaporated. My fears solidified into something real, tangible, as if the building itself had handed me proof that the dead still lingered. The radio crackled again, just faintly, like static brushing against my ear, carrying the same whisper. "Can you see me now?" I could barely respond, my throat dry, my mind racing. I scanned the catwalk frantically, but the figure was gone, vanished as if it had never been there, though the badge in my hand said otherwise, proof enough that what I had experienced was real. My co-workers, now aware of my pale, shaking state, tried to calm me, insisting it had to be a prank, that maybe someone had gotten access to the catwalk and dropped the badge as a joke, but when we checked the security footage, the upper walkway showed nothing. No person, no movement, no indication that anyone had been there at all during my shift. The footage was pristine, empty, yet the badge was in my hand, and the memory of the whisper lingered, cold and penetrating. The rest of my shift became a blur of terror and hyper-awareness, every echo, every shadow magnified in my mind, every movement of the forklift making me flinch as though it might reveal the presence again. By the time morning arrived and the day staff came in, I could barely speak, my hands shaking as I handed over the badge and recounted the events. OSHA inspectors were called. They conducted a thorough investigation, checking the catwalk, the security systems, even the schedules, and they confirmed that no one had been assigned to the upper walkway during my shift. No one could have been up there, and yet the evidence, the badge, my testimony, the sheer impossibility of the figure's movements, left everyone uneasy. I lasted one more week after that, trying desperately to convince myself it was stress, fatigue, imagination, but every night when I drove home, I felt the same presence, lingering at the edge of perception, and every time I closed my eyes I could hear that whisper, echoing from the dark corners of that enormous warehouse. "Can you see me now?" I left the job for good, unable to reconcile what I had seen with what was possible, unable to face the idea that something, someone trapped or wandering, could exist in that empty, humming expanse. Even now, years later, I avoid warehouses at night, shiver at the sound of footsteps overhead, and I think about the man on the catwalk, the ghostly figure who seemed to bend space and time, leaving behind the badge, a cold proof of presence that no living being could explain, and I wonder if he still walks there on the graveyard shift, waiting for the next person to see him, waiting to ask in that slow, deliberate whisper, "Can you see me now?"